Ignored by society and surrounded by silence, a man finds in his dog the only ally to face a power that rules everything, until something unbelievable happens. The sun was rising over the Pine Springs Mountains when Adam Newman opened his eyes. At 52 years old, he always woke up at the same time, not by the sound of an alarm, but by the subtle vibrations that the world around him produced, Wind swaying the leaves of the large blackberry tree in front of his cabin created a rhythm that he felt through the wooden floorboards. Thor, his loyal German shepherd companion, was already awake, stretching his front paws in a morning stretch. "Good. Morning, my friend," murmured Adam, running his hand through the dog's dark fur. Thor responded with a wag of his tail, his intelligent eyes following his owner's every gesture. Between them, words weren't necessary. Their connection transcended any sound barrier. Adam's morning routine was a sacred ritual. First, the slowly brewed coffee, while observing the creek that ran a few meters from his house. The crystal-clear water danced over the stones, creating small waves that he followed with his gaze. Then the walk to the vegetable garden at the back of the property, where he grew tomatoes, lettuce, and herbs that perfumed the pure morning air. That Tuesday morning, however, something was different. Thor seemed restless, his ears perked up, toward the dirt road that led to the cabin. Adam followed the dog's gaze and saw the dust cloud approaching. A black, luxurious car completely contrasted with the rural simplicity of the place. The vehicle stopped in front of the wooden gate. Out of it stepped Oliver Blackwell, the businessman for whom Adam had worked for 3 years as a personal driver. Tall, with grey hair combed back and always wearing impeccable suits, Oliver carried with him an aura of authority that intimidated most people, but not Adam. "Good morning, Adam," said Oliver, gesturing exaggeratedly so the deaf man could read his lips. Adam immediately became suspicious. Oliver had never visited his property before. "Mr. Blackwell," replied Adam, walking to the fence. "Did something happen? I thought we were only meeting this afternoon." Oliver smiled, but there was something forced in his expression. "Actually, I came here for an important conversation. May I come in?" Adam hesitated for a moment but opened the gate. Thor accompanied the two men to the cabin's porch, strategically positioning himself between Adam and the visitor. The former police dog's instinct had never left him. "Coffee?" offered Adam, indicating a wooden chair. "No, thank you. I'll get straight to the point." Oliver settled in, crossing his legs. "Adam, you know I've always had a lot of respect for your work. You're punctual, discreet, reliable. That's why I came here to make a proposal that could change your life." Adam frowned. "What kind of proposal?" "I want to buy your property." The statement came directly, without beating around the bush. "I'm willing to pay well above market value, $500,000. The silence that followed was heavy. Adam looked around, absorbing every detail of the place he had called home for more than 15 years. The cabin's wooden beams, aged by time, told stories. The garden he had planted himself, the mountain view that framed each sunrise, the silent sound of the creek that calmed him on sleepless nights. "Why?" asked Adam, fixing his gaze on Oliver's lips. "I have projects for this region. Sustainable development, ecotourism. Your land has strategic potential." The words came out quickly, rehearsed. Adam slowly shook his head. "It's not for sale, Mr. Blackwell." Oliver's expression hardened for a fraction of a second, but he quickly recovered his smile. "Adam, you need to think about this more carefully. $500,000 is a lot of money. You could buy another place, maybe closer to town with more comfort." "But I don't want another place," Adam replied, his voice firm. "This is my home. Here I find my peace." Thor, who had remained quiet until then, stood up and moved closer to Adam, as if sensing the growing tension in the conversation. Oliver observed the dog's movement with discomfort. $700,000, insisted Oliver. "That's my final offer." "My answer is still no." Adam stood up, indicating that the conversation was over. "Thank you for the visit, but I have no interest in selling." Oliver remained seated for a few more seconds, measuring Adam with his gaze. Finally, he stood up and adjusted his jacket. "You're making a mistake, Adam. Sometimes in life, it's better to accept changes before they're imposed." The words carried a threatening tone that didn't go unnoticed. Adam felt a shiver run down his spine, but maintained his erect posture. "I'm certain of my decision." Oliver walked to the gate, stopped, and turned one last time. "Think about it, Adam. Think very carefully." He got into the car and left, leaving behind only dust and a feeling that something had irreversibly changed. Adam remained on the porch, Thor by his side, watching the car disappear down the road. Silence reigned again, but now it carried a different weight. There was a storm on the horizon, and he knew his peaceful life was about to be tested, in ways he couldn't yet imagine. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. 3 days had passed since Oliver's visit, and Adam tried to maintain his normal routine. That Thursday he drove to the Blackwell mansion at the usual time, 7 in the morning. The imposing property, with its perfectly manicured gardens and high walls, always gave him a strange feeling. It was beautiful, no doubt, but there was something too artificial about that perfection. Adam parked the black Mercedes in the garage and waited. Normally Oliver appeared punctually at 7:15. Today, however, the minutes dragged on. At 8 o'clock, Marcus, the house butler, finally appeared with an embarrassed expression. "Adam," said Marcus, gesturing slowly to facilitate lip reading, "Mr. Blackwell asked me to tell you that your services will no longer be needed." Adam blinked a few times, processing the information. "What do you mean?" "He said he's cutting costs. He'll be using app drivers from now on." Marcus avoided Adam's gaze. "I'm sorry. You were always very professional. Can I talk to him?" Adam got out of the car, but Marcus shook his head. "He traveled to Cedar Rapids this morning. He left this for you." Marcus handed over an envelope. "It's your severance and a bonus." Adam opened the envelope and saw the check. The amount was correct, even generous, but that didn't ease the feeling of betrayal. 3 years of impeccable work, never a delay, never a problem, and now he was dismissed right after refusing to sell his land. The coincidence was too obvious. "Thank you, Marcus," said Adam, pocketing the envelope. "Take care." The way back home seemed longer than usual. Adam drove his own car, a white Chevy Malibu already a few years old, reflecting on what had happened. It wasn't just the loss of the job that bothered him. After all, he had some savings and could find another job. It was the way he was dismissed, Oliver's cowardice in not facing him directly. When he arrived home, Thor received him on the porch, but his behavior was different. The dog constantly sniffed the air, his ears always alert. Adam observed the animal carefully. In his years of police training, Thor had developed instincts that rarely failed. "What is it, boy?" Adam knelt beside the dog, following his gaze toward the woods that surrounded the property. "Is there something out there?" Thor emitted a low growl, almost inaudible, but Adam felt the vibration through the animal's chest. He stood up and walked to the back fence, observing carefully. At first glance, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but then he saw it. Footprints in the mud near the creek. Boot prints, definitely male and recent. Adam knew every occasional visitor to his property, the mailman, some neighbors, electric company technicians. Those footprints didn't belong to any of them. They were from heavy boots, military perhaps, and followed a pattern that suggested reconnaissance of the terrain. He returned to the house with Thor glued to his legs. The dog remained restless throughout the day, circling the property, investigating every corner. Adam tried to focus on his domestic activities, but the feeling of being watched never left him. In the afternoon, while watering the garden, he noticed an unfamiliar car parked on the road, about 200 meters away. It wasn't uncommon to have cars on that road, which led to some other rural properties, but this one remained stationary for more than an hour. Adam pretended not to notice, but observed discreetly. When he finally headed inside, the car left. Tonti. Friday, the pattern repeated itself. Different cars always keeping their distance, always leaving when Adam showed that he had noticed them. Thor was increasingly agitated, barking at shadows, refusing to move far from his owner during morning walks. It was on Saturday that the situation escalated. Adam had gone to town to shop and returned in the late afternoon. As he approached, The house Thor, who had accompanied him on the trip, began barking frantically from inside the car. Adam parked and observed carefully before getting out. Everything seemed normal, but Thor was clearly disturbed. Walking around the property, Adam discovered why. Someone had been there in his absence. The gate, which he always locked, was merely closed. Small objects had been moved, nothing obvious, but enough for someone who knew every detail of his own house. His drawers had been subtly rummaged. Through some papers were out of order. Even more disturbing, there were footprints all around the house. Someone, or more than one person, had done a complete reconnaissance of the property. Adam felt his heart race. It wasn't paranoia anymore. He was really being watched. That night, Adam could barely sleep. He installed some empty bottles at the ID windows, an improvised alert system he had learned years ago. Any sudden movement would make them fall, creating noise. It wasn't much, but it was something. Thor remained on the porch the entire night like a silent guard. Adam watched the dog from his bedroom window, seeing him patrol back and forth, always alert. There was something primitive and comforting in that unconditional loyalty. When Sunday dawned, Adam made a decision. He couldn't remain passive while his safety was threatened. He needed to understand exactly what was happening, and more importantly, he needed to prepare for what might come. He put on the darkest clothes he had and, with Thor by his side, went out for a thorough inspection of the entire property. If someone was planning something against him, Adam wanted to be prepared. The man who had lost his hearing as a child had learned to trust all his other senses. And at that moment, all of them were telling him the same thing. Danger was close, and the battle for his land had just begun. The early hours of Monday morning were especially dark. Heavy clouds covered the moon, and the wind blew with more intensity than usual through the trees surrounding the cabin. Adam woke up around 3 in the morning, not from any sound, which he couldn't hear, but from the intense vibration coming from the floor. Thor was barking. It wasn't a common alert bark. It was the deep, threatening bark that Adam knew well from the days when Thor was still an active police dog. The kind of sound the animal only made when detecting real and imminent danger. Adam got up quickly, put on a pair of jeans and walked to the bedroom window. The darkness was almost total, but his eyes, adapted to perceive nuances that others didn't notice, caught movement among the trees. 2 dark figures were moving carefully toward the house, clearly trying to avoid being detected. His heart raced. Oliver's veiled threats were materializing. Adam ran to the living room, where Thor was waiting at the front door, his entire body tense, muscles ready for combat. The dog looked at his owner, as if waiting for an order. Adam made a sign with his hand, a command in sign language that Thor knew perfectly from his training days. Protect, defend. The German Shepherd took position beside the main door, while Adam quickly activated his improvised alert system. In recent days, he had installed small motion sensors connected to strobe lights in the windows, an adaptation that allowed him, even without hearing, to perceive when someone approached the house. The first lights began to flash. The intruders were close. Adam ran to the bedroom and grabbed the baseball bat he kept beside the bed. It wasn't much, but it was what he had. He returned to the living room just as the side door handle began to turn slowly. Thor didn't wait any longer. With a powerful leap, the dog launched himself against the door, barking furiously. From the other side, Adam heard, or rather felt through the vibrations, the impact of a body against the wood and a startled shout. "Damn it, there's a dog in here!" The voice reached Adam muffled, but he could partially read the lips through the window glass. "You didn't say anything about a dog," answered another higher-pitched voice. Thor continued his offensive, scratching the door, growling in a way that made the windows vibrate. Adam had never seen the dog so aggressive, not even in the training videos he used to watch. One of the intruders tried to force the kitchen window. Adam ran in that direction, bat in hand, but Thor was faster. The dog jumped onto the kitchen counter with impressive agility for an animal of his size and positioned himself directly in front of the window, barking and showing his teeth. The man outside quickly backed away. "Man, this dog is trained. He's not just some mutt." "Then break the window and finish him," shouted the first intruder. "Are you crazy? Look at the size of that beast." Adam felt a mixture of fear and pride. Thor was being absolutely loyal, courageous beyond any expectation, but the situation was getting too dangerous. He ran to his emergency system and activated all the sensors at once. The entire property lit up like a stage. Strobe lights flashed frantically in all windows, creating a light show that could be seen from miles away. It was exaggerated, but that was exactly what Adam wanted. "What the hell is that?" shouted one of the intruders. "Police! It must be the police!" answered the other. Adam ran to the front window and saw the two figures running toward the woods, clearly panicked by the lights. Thor continued barking for a few more minutes, even after the intruders had disappeared. When silence finally returned, Adam knelt beside Thor and hugged the dog tightly. "Thank you, my friend. Thank you for protecting me." Thor licked his owner's face, tail wagging, but still keeping his senses alert for any new danger. Adam didn't sleep any more that night. He remained seated on the porch with Thor, observing every shadow, every movement of the trees. The emergency lights continued flashing until dawn, a silent declaration that he would not surrender easily. When the sun rose, Adam inspected the surroundings of the house. He found clear footprints in the mud, marks of attempted break-in on the side door, and even a beanie that one of the intruders had lost in the escape. It was concrete evidence of what had happened. Around 8 in the morning, Adam heard the noise of engines approaching. For a moment he tensed, but soon recognized the cars. They were neighbors. Mrs. Carroll, who lived on the closest property, about half a mile away, arrived accompanied by her husband, Mr. Pete. "Adam! Adam!" Mrs. Carroll gestured energetically. "We saw the crazy lights all night. Did something happen?" Adam quickly told them what had happened, showing the evidence. Mrs. Carroll was outraged. "This is outrageous, a hard-working man in his own home." "Pete, call the police right now." "I already did," replied Mr. Pete. "They're sending a patrol car today." More neighbors arrived during the morning. The news spread quickly through the rural community. A deaf man had been attacked during the early morning by unknown intruders and had been saved by his dog. People were shocked and supportive. When Sergeant Miller of the local police arrived to file the report, there was already a small crowd at Adam's property. The police officer examined the evidence, carefully noted everything, but Adam noticed a certain skepticism in his expression. "Mr. Newman," said the sergeant, "do you have any idea who might want to do this? Any enemy? Any dispute?" Adam hesitated. For a moment. He had no concrete evidence against Oliver, only suspicions, but the coincidences were too obvious. "Recently, someone made an offer to buy my land," he answered carefully. "When I refused, I was fired from the job I had with that person." Then the intimidation began. "Who is this person?" "Oliver Blackwell." The sergeant stopped writing and looked directly at Adam. "Oliver Blackwell? The businessman?" "Yes." There was an awkward silence. Adam realized he had touched on a name that carried weight in the town. The sergeant continued writing, but with less enthusiasm than before. "We'll investigate, Mr. Newman. For now, I recommend that you keep your doors well locked and, if possible, install a better security system." When the police left, Adam was left with the impression that there wouldn't be much effort in the investigation, but it didn't matter. The intimidation attempt had failed, and now the entire community knew what was happening. Thor remained by his side all day, like a silent bodyguard. At night, when Adam finally lay down, the dog positioned himself at the bedroom door, as if knowing that his vigilance would be necessary for a long time to come. The war had officially begun, but Adam was no longer alone. He had Thor, he had supportive neighbors, and most importantly, he had the certainty that his cause was just. Oliver Blackwell would discover that intimidating a deaf man wouldn't be as easy as he had imagined. On Tuesday afternoon, Adam was repairing the back fence when Thor began wagging his tail. This time, however, it wasn't an alert of danger. It was the happy movement the dog made when recognizing a friendly visitor. Adam looked up and saw a woman walking along the path that led to his house. She was young, around 30, brown hair, tied in a ponytail and simple clothes, jeans and a white blouse. She carried a leather folder and walked with the confidence of someone who knew the terrain well. When she got close enough, Adam recognized her, Laura Mitchell, a teacher from the municipal school. What surprised him most, however, was when she stopped a few meters away and began gesturing in sign language. "Good afternoon, Adam. May I talk to you?" Adam blinked a few times, processing the surprise. There were few people in Pine Springs who mastered sign language, and Laura was one of them. "Good afternoon, teacher," replied Adam, also in sign language. "Of course you can come closer. Thor won't hurt you." Laura smiled and walked to the porch, where Adam invited her to sit. Thor sniffed her briefly, and then settled at the feet of the two, clearly approving of the visit. "I heard about what happened here early Monday morning," said Laura, alternating between sign language and speech so Adam could choose the most comfortable form of communication. "The whole town is talking about it. News travels fast in a small town," replied Adam with a half smile. "Especially when it involves Thor here." Laura caressed the dog's head. "My younger brother, Charlie, is also deaf. He was the one who taught me sign language when we were children. I remember you from school days, but you were a few years older." Adam nodded. He vaguely remembered a small girl who sometimes accompanied a deaf boy to special education classes. "Charlie lives in Cedar Rapids now," continued Laura. "He's a graphic designer, very successful. He always says that deafness was never a limitation. For him, just a difference." "Your brother is right," said Adam. "Sometimes I see the world in ways that other people can't." Laura smiled, but then her expression turned serious. "Adam, I didn't come just for a social visit. I came because I'm concerned about what's happening in our town." "What do you mean?" "Oliver Blackwell isn't just an ambitious businessman. In the last 2 years, he's bought more than 15 rural properties in the region. He always offers values above the market, but when someone refuses—" Laura paused. "The problems start." Adam leaned forward, interested. "What kind of problems?" Mr. Jack, who had a cattle farm near Eagle Ridge, refused to sell at first. In 1 week, the health department showed up there 3 times, finding irregularities that had never existed before. Then it was the IRS, alleging tax evasion. In the end, he sold out of desperation for a much lower value than the initial offer. And the Sullivan family? Same thing. Problems with environmental permits, inexplicable fines, psychological pressure. Mrs. Sullivan even developed heart problems from so much stress. Adam absorbed the information in silence. He wasn't alone in this fight. Oliver had a pattern of behavior. "Why are you telling me this?" asked Adam. "Because you're different from the others," replied Laura. "You didn't back down. Even after the intimidation, the problems, you're still resisting, and that has given hope to many people." "Hope?" "There's a group of people in town who are tired of Oliver Blackwell's methods. Merchants who lost customers because he brought unfair competition, rural workers who lost jobs when farms were sold, families who had to move. Everyone is afraid to speak up, but seeing you resist—" Laura opened the folder she was carrying and took out some papers. "I started researching Oliver's activities. I wanted to understand why he has so much interest in specific rural lands." Adam examined the documents. They were maps of the region with various properties marked in different colors. "The red ones are the lands he's already bought," explained Laura. "The yellow ones are those he tried to buy but couldn't, and the blue one," she pointed to a specific spot on the map, "is your property." Adam studied the pattern. There was something systematic there, but he couldn't identify what. "I took this map to Ryan Anderson, who is a biologist and works with environmental issues," said Laura. "He made an interesting discovery." "What?" "All these properties, without exception, are located on or near water springs. Your land, specifically, is situated right on top of an aquifer." Adam felt a chill. "Aquifer?" "An underground reserve of pure water, of excellent quality. With the water crisis the country has been facing, drinking water has become an extremely valuable resource. Whoever controls the sources controls the future." The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. In Adam's mind, it wasn't just his land that Oliver wanted. It was the water beneath it. Ryan said your specific property is located over one of the purest springs in the region, continued Laura. The water that flows in your creek is just a small sample of what exists underground. Adam stood up and walked to the fence, looking toward the creek that he had always considered just a beautiful natural feature of his property. Now he understood that he possessed something much more valuable than land. He possessed life. There's something else, said Laura, joining him. I got information that Oliver is planning to install a mineral water bottling company. It would be $1 million business, but he needs to control all the sources in the region to ensure the monopoly. And I'm the only person who hasn't sold. Exactly. You're the only obstacle between him and a business that could be worth millions. Adam remained silent, absorbing all the information. Thor approached and sat beside him, as if sensing that his owner needed support. What can I do? Adam finally asked. First, document everything. Every threat, every intimidation. Second, don't face this alone. Laura gently touched his arm. There's a meeting scheduled for Thursday night at Mrs. Zoe's house. These are people who, like you, have suffered from Oliver's methods. People who want to do something. Adam looked at Laura, seeing in her not just a concerned teacher but an ally. For the first time since everything began, he didn't feel completely alone. I'll be there, said Adam. Great. And Adam, Laura smiled, bring Thor. He's become a kind of symbol in town, the dog who faced Oliver's thugs and won. When Laura left, Adam remained on the porch with Thor, looking at the creek with different eyes. His land wasn't just a home. It was a battlefield for the survival of an entire community, and he was at the center of this war, whether he wanted it or not. The fight would be harder than he had imagined, but now he had something he didn't have before: allies, information, and a cause greater than his own tranquility. The resistance had found its first unlikely leader, a deaf man and his faithful dog. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. Thursday arrived, with a light rain that made the air fresher and the smell of the earth more intense. Adam spent the day restless, thinking about the meeting that would happen that night at Mrs. Zoe's house. Thor seemed to share his anxiety, circling the house without finding a comfortable position. Around 6 in the evening, as Adam was preparing for dinner, Thor ran to the front door, barking just once, the signal that indicated a friendly visitor. Adam looked through the window and saw Laura walking along the path, but this time she wasn't alone. A young, thin man with glasses accompanied her. He seemed nervous, constantly looking behind him as if fearing he was being followed. Adam opened the door before the two reached the porch. Good evening, Adam, said Laura in sign language. This is Brian Armstrong. He needs to talk to you urgently. Adam studied the young man. There was something familiar about him, but he couldn't identify what. Brian was young, perhaps 25, wearing a wrinkled dress shirt and carrying an old leather briefcase. Can I trust him? Adam asked Laura directly. You can, she replied. Brian worked for Oliver Blackwell until last week. He has important information. Brian approached, visibly tense. Mr. Newman, I apologize for showing up like this without warning, but when I learned about your situation and what's really happening, I couldn't stay quiet. Adam invited both inside. In the living room, Brian sat on the edge of the chair as if ready to run at any moment. I worked as Oliver's personal assistant for 2 years, Brian began, speaking slowly so Adam could follow. I managed his schedule, organized documents, made contacts. I thought it was just a normal job until I started noticing some strange things. What kind of things? Asked Adam. Brian opened his briefcase and removed a stack of papers. First, these geological maps. Oliver hired a specialized company to do a detailed survey of the subsoil of the entire region. Adam examined the documents. They were technical maps, with symbols he didn't completely understand, but he could see. His property marked with special emphasis. This here is the company's report. Brian pointed to another document. It confirms that your property is located on one of the largest aquifers in the region. The water is of exceptional purity, suitable for direct consumption and commercial bottling. Laura came closer to see the papers. This confirms what Ryan Suspected. There's more, said Brian, removing other documents from the briefcase. This is the business plan that Oliver developed. He intends to create a company called Crystal Waters of Pine Springs and monopolize all mineral water distribution in the region. Adam skimmed through the document. Impressive numbers. Projected annual revenue of $15 million, export plans, contracts with major supermarket chains. And this one, Brian showed a different map, is the construction plan for the bottling factory. It would be built exactly where your property is, to have direct access to the main source. That's why he needs my land so badly, murmured Adam. It's not just that, said Brian, lowering his voice even knowing that Adam couldn't hear him. Oliver has political connections. He's already secured all the necessary environmental licenses. He got approval from the city hall from the state government. Everything was arranged even before he bought the lands. How is that possible? Asked Laura, indignant. Pure and simple corruption. Oliver has dossiers on various local politicians. I saw the conversations, the exchanged envelopes. He leaves nothing to chance. Adam felt a mixture of anger and discouragement. How could he fight against someone who had so many connections, so much power? There's one more thing, said Brian, hesitating. The reason why I decided to come here, even knowing the risks. He removed a final document from the briefcase. This is the minutes of a meeting that happened last week. Oliver was talking with some men from outside of town. They were discussing more drastic methods to solve the problem of your property. Adam quickly read the document. Words like physical pressure, incident, definitive solution appeared several times. What exactly does this mean? Asked Adam, although he feared the answer. It means that the intimidation attempts didn't work, and they're planning something. Worse, replied Brian. It was when I heard this conversation that I decided to leave the company. I don't want to be complicit in anything violent. Laura took Adam's hand. That's why we need to act quickly. Tonight's meeting isn't just to talk. We need to organize real resistance. You don't understand, said Brian, even more nervous. Oliver has contacts everywhere. Police, city hall, state government. If you simply report this, the papers will disappear and I might end up having an accident. Then what do you suggest? Asked Adam. Brian thought for a moment. We need evidence that can't be ignored or hidden. We need to make this story public, call attention from the state media, make so much noise that Oliver can't suppress it. And how do we do that? The public hearing, replied Laura suddenly. Every company that wants to exploit natural resources needs to go through a public hearing. It's the law. Brian nodded. Exactly. Oliver's hearing is scheduled for next week. If we can show up there with evidence, with witnesses, with the community mobilized, we can stop the project, completed Adam. Or at least force a serious investigation, said Brian. But we need to be smart. Oliver will try to sabotage any opposition. Adam stood up and walked to the window, looking at the creek that ran in the yard. All his life he had sought peace, isolation, tranquility. Now he found himself at the center of a battle that could define the future of an entire community. Thor approached and rested his head on Adam's leg, as if sensing his owner's internal conflict. Brian, said Adam, turning to the young man, do you have copies of all these documents? I do, hidden in a place Oliver would never find. And are you willing to testify publicly, even knowing the risks? Brian swallowed hard but nodded. I am. I can't live with this guilt on my conscience. Adam looked at Laura, who smiled encouragingly. Then he looked at Thor, who seemed ready to face any challenge alongside his owner. Then let's go to this meeting, Adam finally said. And let's plan how to give Oliver Blackwell the fight he didn't expect. When the three left the house toward Mrs. Zoe's property, Adam felt he was crossing a definitive line. There was no going back. The war for the water of Pine Springs had officially begun, and he, a deaf man who just wanted to live in peace, had become the unlikely general of a silent revolution. Thor walked by his side, faithful as always, ready to face any battle that awaited him. And for the first time in a long time, Adam didn't feel alone in his world of silence. Mrs. Zoe's grocery store had never received so many people at the same time. When Adam, Laura, and Brian arrived, there were already more than 20 people gathered in the small store. Chairs borrowed from neighbors formed an improvised circle between the product shelves. Thor caused a small commotion when he entered. Everyone wanted to greet the hero dog who had defended Adam. Mrs. Zoe, a 60-year-old lady with grey hair and determined eyes, made a point of receiving Adam personally. She gestured slowly, making sure he could read her lips. "Adam, my son, I'm so glad you came. The whole town is talking about your courage." Adam was embarrassed by the attention, but Laura reassured him with a smile. "Let them see who you really are," she said in sign language. Ryan Anderson, the biologist who had analyzed the maps, approached to greet Adam. He was a middle-aged man with a grizzled beard and practical field clothes. "Finally, I meet the man who's giving Oliver Blackwell a headache," he said, smiling. "It's an honor to meet you too," replied Adam. Mr. Jack, the farmer who had been forced to sell his property, was sitting in a chair at the back of the store. When he saw Adam, he stood up with difficulty. His legs weren't the same at 70, and came to greet him. "Young man, you're doing what I didn't have the courage to do," said Mr. Jack, his eyes watering. "I already lost my land, but seeing you resist gives me hope that we can still stop this man." The conversation was interrupted when Mrs. Zoe tapped a spoon against a pot, calling everyone's attention. Laura positioned herself next to Adam to simultaneously translate into sign language. "Folks, let's start our meeting," said Mrs. Zoe. "You all know why we're here. Oliver, Blackwell is destroying our community, and we need to do something about it." A murmur of agreement echoed through the store. Adam observed the faces around him: merchants, farmers, workers, housewives, simple people who had decided not to remain silent anymore. "First, let's hear what Brian has to tell us," said Laura, indicating the young man who was nervous in a corner. Brian approached the center of the circle, his hands trembling slightly. I worked for Oliver Blackwell for 2 years. I saw many things I shouldn't have seen." He began to explain about the documents, the water monopolization plan, the political corruption. As he spoke, the indignation in the room grew. When he mentioned the threats of violence against Adam, some people stood up, outraged. "This is outrageous," shouted Mike, owner of a mechanical workshop. "We can't let this man do whatever he wants with our town." "Calm down, everyone," intervened Ryan. "Anger won't solve anything. We need to be strategic." Mrs. Sullivan, whose husband had been forced to sell their family farm, raised her hand to speak. "Ryan is right. Oliver has a lot of power, many connections. If we go in with just anger, he'll crush us." "So what do you suggest?" asked Mrs. Zoe. Laura stood up. "The public hearing is our best chance. It's an official forum with press present, where Oliver can't easily manipulate the results." "But how do we know he won't bribe everyone there too?" asked Mr. Jack. "Because we're going to make that impossible," said Brian. "We'll bring so many people, so much evidence, so much noise, that he won't be able to suppress it." Adam asked to speak. Silence fell in the store as everyone waited for his words. "I never wanted to be at the center of a fight like this," said Adam, with Laura simultaneously translating. "I always sought peace, silence, tranquility. But I discovered that sometimes peace needs to be defended." He paused, looking at each person present. "Oliver thinks that because I'm deaf, I'm easy to intimidate. He thinks that because I live isolated, I don't have support. He was wrong." Spontaneous applause erupted throughout the store. Thor, sitting at Adam's feet, raised his head as if perceiving the importance of the moment. "I'll fight for my land," continued Adam. "But it's not just for my land, it's for the water that belongs to all of us. It's for your right to live in peace without being persecuted by a greedy man." "And we'll fight alongside you," shouted Mrs. Zoe, followed by a chorus of agreement. Ryan stood up. "So let's get organized. We need a concrete plan for the hearing." During the next hour, the group discussed strategies. Each person took on a responsibility. Mrs. Zoe would be in charge of mobilizing other merchants. Mr. Jack would talk to farmers in the region. Mike would organize the workers. Ryan would prepare a technical report on the environmental damage of the project. "And I'll contact the press," said Laura. "I have some contacts in Cedar Rapids. If we can bring independent reporters, it will be harder for Oliver to manipulate the situation." When the meeting ended, it was almost midnight. People dispersed gradually, but not before each one personally greeted Adam. For the first time in his life, he felt part of something bigger than himself. Laura offered to accompany Adam and Brian back, but when they left the grocery store, they discovered they weren't alone. 3 dark cars were parked on the street, with men watching every movement. "They were watching us," murmured Brian, pale with fear. Adam observed the cars calmly. Thor growled softly, tense. One of the men got out of one of the vehicles and approached. He was tall, strong, wearing dark clothes. "You had an interesting meeting," said the man, looking directly at Adam. "I hope you haven't wasted time planning imprudent things." "Who's asking?" said Laura bravely. "Someone who cares about your safety," replied the man with a cold smile. "It would be a shame if someone got hurt because of misunderstandings." Adam stepped forward, facing the man directly. Even though he couldn't hear the words, the threatening tone was evident in the subject's posture and expression. "You can." "Tell your boss," said Adam, clearly articulating each word, "that I'm not easily intimidated, and now I'm not alone." The man looked around and realized that several people from the meeting were still nearby, observing the situation. Mrs. Zoe was at the door of her store, arms crossed. Ryan and Mr. Jack stopped on the sidewalk. Mike appeared at the corner with 2 more men. The veiled threat lost strength in the face of the silent demonstration of unity. The man realized that the situation had changed. Adam was no longer an isolated target. "Have a good night," said the man, returning to the car. The 3 vehicles left, but the message had been clear. Oliver knew everything and wasn't willing to back down easily. "That was scary," said Brian, still trembling. "It was," agreed Laura, "but it was also revealing. If Oliver is sending thugs to openly threaten us, it's because he's afraid." Adam looked at the friends around him, for now he could call them that, and felt a strength he didn't know before. Thor wagged his tail as if approving the new reality. The public hearing would be in 3 days, and for the first time since everything began, Adam believed he had a real chance of winning. Not alone, but with the strength of a community united by justice and the determination to protect what was rightfully theirs. The 3 days leading up to the public hearing passed like a hurricane. Adam barely recognized his peaceful life from a week ago. His property had become an operations center for community resistance, with people constantly coming and going, planning strategies and organizing mobilization. On Sunday morning, Adam woke up early and found Laura already on the porch, drinking coffee and reviewing a stack of documents. Thor was lying at her feet, already accustomed to the teacher's constant presence. "Good morning," said Laura in sign language, smiling. "I brought fresh bread from the bakery. I thought you might need extra energy today." Adam sat down beside her, observing the stack of papers. "Did you get in touch with the journalists?" "Better than that," replied Laura, excited. "I spoke with an investigative reporter from Cedar Rapids, Paula Myers. She was already investigating cases of environmental corruption in rural areas and became very interested in our story." "Is she coming?" "Yes, and she's not coming alone. She's bringing a film crew. She wants to document the entire hearing and, if we can gather enough evidence, do a special report on Oliver's methods." Adam felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. Media attention could help, but it also made everything riskier. Brian arrived around 10 in the morning carrying a heavy box. He seemed more confident than in previous days, as if he had found courage in the collective cause. "I brought everything," he said, opening the box. "Original documents, recordings of some conversations, compromising emails. Oliver will have a lot of explaining to do." "This is dangerous for you," said Adam. "Are you sure?" "I am," replied Brian, determined. "I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of being a silent accomplice." During the afternoon, Ryan arrived with his completed technical report. It was a 15-page document detailing the environmental impacts of Oliver's project and the ecological importance of the region's aquifers. "His project isn't just greed," explained Ryan. "It's potentially disastrous for the local ecosystem. If he intensively exploits these sources, it could dry up smaller springs and affect all the fauna and flora in the region." In the afternoon, Mrs. Zoe appeared accompanied by Mr. Jack and 5 more people whom Adam didn't know. "Adam, my son," said Mrs. Zoe, "I want to introduce some friends. This is John Parker, president of the Rural Producers Association from the neighboring county. This is Professor Helen from the State University, a specialist in water resources. Each new person brought a different perspective, but all converged on the same point. Oliver Blackwell represented a threat that went far beyond Pine Springs. Cases like this are happening all over rural America, explained Professor Helen. Businessmen with political connections are monopolizing natural resources while local communities are left helpless. That's why your resistance is so important, added John Parker. You've become a symbol for many people. Adam felt uncomfortable with the weight of responsibility, but Laura noticed his anxiety and gently touched his arm. You're not carrying this alone, she said in sign language. We're all a team. Late in the afternoon, when everyone had left, Adam and Laura walked to the creek. Thor accompanied them, running between the trees as if wanting to relieve the day's tension. I'm afraid, admitted Adam, breaking the silence. Afraid? Of what? Of disappointing these people, of not being strong enough to face Oliver, of discovering that all this fight was in vain. Laura stopped and turned to him. Adam, you've already won. What do you mean? 3 weeks ago, you were an isolated man who just wanted to live in peace. Oliver thought it would be easy to intimidate you, buy you out or force you to leave. But look what happened. You inspired an entire community to rise up. You brought to light a network of corruption that nobody dared to question. You changed everything. Adam absorbed the words, feeling a mixture of pride and responsibility. And there's something else, continued Laura, moving closer to him. You showed me a courage I didn't know existed. You made me realize that it's worth fighting for what's right, even when it seems impossible. The two looked at each other in silence for a moment. Adam realized that amid all the turbulence of recent days, something was growing between him and Laura, something that went beyond partnership in resistance. Laura, She touched his lips with her finger, interrupting him. After the hearing, she said, smiling, first let's save our town. On Monday, the day before the hearing, the movement was intense. News about the meeting had spread, and people from neighboring towns began to arrive. Pine Springs Central Square filled with posters and banners. Our water is not for sale. Down with corruption. Justice for Adam. Thor became a local celebrity. Children ran to pet him. Adults took photos. With the hero dog. Adam was simultaneously proud and embarrassed by all the attention. Paula Myers, the journalist from Cedar Rapids, arrived late in the afternoon with her crew. She was a determined woman, around 40, who immediately became interested in the details of the story. This is exactly the kind of story that needs to be told, she said, after hearing Adam, Laura, and Brian. Corruption, abuse of power, communities being exploited. America needs to know what's happening here. While the film crew set up equipment, Adam observed the movement in the square from his porch. Hundreds of people had gathered spontaneously, many carrying posters with Thor's photos and supportive phrases. I never imagined this could happen, he said to Laura. What? That my search for silence and peace would end up generating so much noise. Laura laughed. Sometimes silence speaks louder than any shout. On Tuesday morning, the day of the hearing, Adam woke up with a strange feeling. The property was quiet, quieter than normal. Thor also seemed tense, circling the house, sniffing the air. When he went out to the porch, Adam understood why. There were no cars on the road, no visible movement. It was as if the entire town was holding its breath, waiting for what was to come. Laura arrived early, wearing formal clothes for the hearing. Brian appeared soon after, carrying his box of documents and visibly nervous. Are you ready? Asked Laura. Adam looked at Thor, who positioned himself by his side like a faithful bodyguard. He looked at the documents that could bring down Oliver Blackwell. He looked at the woman who had become not just his ally, but someone special in his life. We're ready, replied Adam. When the trio left the property toward the town center, Adam felt he was leaving behind not just his home, but an entire phase of his life. Regardless of what happened at the hearing, he would no longer be the same isolated man who just wanted to live in peace. He had become Adam Newman, the man who dared to confront power and discovered he wasn't alone. And beside him, Thor walked, with the dignity of a warrior who knew that the most important battle of their lives was just beginning. The town hall auditorium had never housed so many people at the same time. When Adam, Laura, and Brian arrived at 2 in the afternoon, there was already a crowd at the doors. People from Pine Springs and neighboring towns gathered, many carrying posters and banners. Thor caused a small commotion when he appeared. Spontaneous applause arose from the crowd. "Look at that," murmured Brian, impressed. "There must be more than 500 people here." Adam observed the scene with emotion. He recognized familiar faces: Mrs. Zoe, Mr. Jack, Ryan, Mike, Mrs. Sullivan, Professor Helen, John Parker. But there were many he didn't know. People who had come from far away just to support the cause. Paula Myers and her film crew were already strategically positioned, documenting everything. Other journalists were also present. The story had caught the attention of regional media. Inside the auditorium, the tension was palpable. At the main table sat the mayor, representatives from the environmental department, a public prosecutor, and the hearing mediator. On the right side, Oliver Blackwell occupied a table with 3 lawyers and a stack of documents. When Adam entered, accompanied by Laura, Brian, and Thor, a respectful silence fell over the room. Oliver looked directly at him, and Adam could see frustration and anger in the businessman's eyes. The hearing mediator, Dr. Carlson, opened the proceedings. This public hearing aims to discuss the water resource exploitation project of Crystal Waters of Pine Springs. We will first hear the project presentation, then the community's statements. Oliver stood up, impeccable in his dark suit. His presentation was technical, polished, full of impressive numbers about job creation, economic development, and benefits for the region. He spoke for 40 minutes, using graphs and projections that painted a prosperous future for Pine Springs. "This project," concluded Oliver, "represents a unique opportunity for sustainable development in our region. We hope to count on the support of the enlightened community." Polite applause came from some of Oliver's supporters present at the hearing, but most of the audience remained silent. "Now we open for community statements," said Dr. Carlson. Ryan was the first to speak, presenting his technical report on the environmental impacts. His exposition was clear and forceful, showing how intensive exploitation could irreversibly affect the local ecosystem. Then it was Professor Helen's turn, who spoke about the importance of aquifers for regional water security. Her academic credibility gave scientific weight to the community's concerns. Mr. Jack approached the microphone with difficulty, but his voice came out firm and emotional. "Ladies and gentlemen, I lost my land to this man. I was pressured, intimidated, humiliated. I don't want anyone else to go through what I went through." When it was Adam's turn, the silence in the auditorium was absolute. Laura positioned herself beside him to translate his speech into sign language for the deaf community present. "My name is Adam Newman," he began, his voice clear and firm. "I've been deaf since childhood, but I learned to hear the world in other ways. I learned to hear the land, the water, the people, and what I hear tells me something is very wrong." Adam told his story: Oliver's initial proposal, the threats, the dismissal, the attempted invasion of his property. With each word, the indignation in the auditorium grew. "I discovered that I'm not just an obstacle to a business project," continued Adam. "I'm the last barrier between a community and an exploitation scheme that goes far beyond what we imagined." It was then that Adam nodded to Brian, who nervously stood up and walked to the microphone. "My name is Brian Armstrong," he said, his voice trembling at first. "I worked as Oliver Blackwell's personal assistant for 2 years, and I came here to tell the truth about what's really happening." A murmur of tension ran through the auditorium. Oliver immediately stood up. "Mr. Mediator, I protest. This is a disgruntled employee who—" "Mr. Blackwell, please," interrupted Dr. Carlson. "The young man has the right to speak." Brian took a deep breath and began to reveal everything: the secret geological maps, the monopolization plans, the conversations about political corruption, the threats against Adam. "I have here," said Brian, raising a folder, "documents that prove that Oliver Blackwell is not interested in sustainable development. He wants to control all the water in the region to create a $1 million monopoly. The explosion was immediate. Cries of indignation arose from the audience. Oliver stood up again, furious. These are lies, forged documents. This young man was fired for incompetence. Then explain this. Brian pulled out a digital recorder from the folder. Recording of a meeting between you and local politicians, discussing bribes to expedite environmental licenses. The audio began to play on the sound system. Oliver's voice was unmistakable, discussing values, promising benefits for quick approvals, mentioning methods to resolve Adam's problem. The auditorium exploded. People stood up shouting. Oliver tried to speak, but his voice was lost in the tumult. His lawyers whispered furiously among themselves. Dr. Carlson banged his gavel several times, trying to restore order. "Silence! Silence, please!" When the tumult subsided, Paula Myers raised her hand to speak. "Mr. Mediator, as a representative of the press, I would like to know if there is more evidence about these allegations." Brian nodded and began distributing copies of the documents to the members of the table and to the journalists present. They were secret contracts, compromising emails, financial spreadsheets showing suspicious payments. Oliver tried one last card. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a setup, a conspiracy to destroy a project that would benefit the entire region." It was then that something unexpected happened. Thor, who had remained quiet beside Adam during the entire hearing, suddenly stood up and began barking toward Oliver. It wasn't a common bark. It was the alarm bark that the dog had learned during his police training. Adam followed Thor's gaze and saw some men discreetly approaching from the sides of the auditorium. They were the same ones who had tried to invade his property weeks ago, and now they seemed to have instructions to cause a disturbance or worse. "Watch out!" shouted Adam, pointing to the men. The community reacted instinctively. Mr. Jack, despite his age, positioned himself between the thugs and Adam. Mike and his mechanic friends did the same. In seconds, a human barrier formed, protecting not just Adam, but the entire mediation table. Oliver's men backed off, realizing they were outnumbered. Oliver himself turned pale, realizing that his plan had completely failed. Dr. Carlson stood up, clearly shaken. "Mr. Blackwell, these are very serious accusations. This hearing is suspended until the competent authorities can properly investigate all the evidence presented." "Prosecutor," continued the mediator, addressing the public prosecutor present, "I believe you have sufficient elements to initiate a formal investigation." The prosecutor nodded gravely. "Certainly, I will immediately request the opening of a public civil inquiry." When the hearing was officially closed, the crowd outside exploded in celebration. Adam was carried on people's shoulders. Thor barked with joy, and Laura couldn't contain tears of emotion. Paula Myers approached Adam with a broad smile. "This story is going to become a documentary. You just brought down one of the most elaborate corruption schemes I've ever seen." 3 months later, Adam was on his porch observing the creek that ran peacefully on his property. Oliver Blackwell had been arrested, his assets confiscated, and the water exploitation project definitively cancelled. Brian had become a symbol of civic courage and secured a new job at an environmental NGO. Laura approached, carrying 2 coffees. She had moved to a house near Adam's property, and the two had discovered that love could flourish even in the most adverse circumstances. "You know what's funny?" said Laura, sitting next to him. "What?" "You always wanted silence, and you ended up being the voice of an entire community." Adam smiled, putting his arm around her shoulders. Thor was lying at his feet, finally at peace after all the turbulence. "I learned something important," said Adam. "Sometimes silence only has value when we know when to break it." The sun was setting behind the Pine Springs Mountains, painting the sky golden. The creek continued to run crystal clear, free and protected for future generations. And on the wooden porch of a simple cabin, a deaf man and a sign language teacher planned a future where justice and love could coexist in perfect harmony. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like.